think there's actually three components to that. So one is every year that you're in the workforce, you become a slightly better worker. So that's maybe worth a couple of percent. We economists call that returns to experience. Every year you stay with your employer, you become better adept at navigating the internal bureaucracies and you become more effective within that firm. We call that returns to tenure. And so if you're not at work, you're not accumulating any of those. And that's worth maybe 5% of your salary, but it's worth that for the rest of your life. And then particularly for very highly educated white-collar jobs, there's this third issue, which I think is a signaling issue. There's no woman on partner track at a leading law firm or a woman on tenure track at a leading university who'll feel comfortable getting pregnant before they've reached partner or tenure. And the problem is those who vote on these decisions see the choice to step out of the workforce as being a signal about your future commitment to the career. If you're the type of woman who'd take time off, then you're also the type of woman who's not going to work too hard once we make you partner. And as a result, women fear, I think rightly, that it's not a great decision before, stepping out of the workforce is not a great decision before others are going to make these sort of very large career decisions on your behalf.
So it sounds like you all are arguing that specialization is still a pretty fraught choice to make if you're going to be the at-home person.
So I think the way to think about this is that our life expectancy has increased so much that people have decades in the labor force.
Right.
And so when you step out, you've got to think about what are going to be the effects of stepping out today for all your remaining time in the labor force. When women used to think about this, the vast majority of married couples had small children in their home. In 1880, 75% of married couples had children in the house. It's less than half today. In fact, I think it's about 40% of married couples have children in their home. So the majority of married couples don't have children, and that's not because we aren't having kids. It's because there's this period from becoming an adult at 20 to potentially working till you're 70, 75. That's 50, 55 years.
Right.
Look, ideally, it would be great to spend more time with your kids when they're 0 to 8. And by 8, it seems like they don't like you much anymore. They're not as interested in hanging out with you. The great thing about 3 is they really want to hang out with you, right? So that's when you want to be around. But our whole labor force is not very conducive to people who say, I'm going to take 5 years out.
It's funny that when you say that, when you talk about how long our careers are and how long life is, you'd think, well, why not then take 3 years out or 5 years out? Or and I've heard, actually, again with the same-sex reporting that I did, I was interviewing a lesbian couple, and lesbian couples are less able to specialize because women's wages are lower, and so they're less able to afford just having one person work and the other person stay home. But one of the women I was talking to said, if I could afford it, I would definitely stay home with my kids, because what's 3 years? What's 4 years? But you're saying that actually it's...
The problem is when those 3 and 4 years are. I will tell you that I do sometimes think it with glee. I hope that my daughter has children when I'm about 65 and I will happily retire and be her nanny.
Right.
Because, there is something joyful about staying home with kids. But it's really, when you're doing it at the peak of your career, it can be very costly.
The cost is greater because you're going to knock off your future wages for a heck of a lot longer than you once did. That's sort of the cost benefit here.
And to put it in just in terms, it's a time where you're actually rapidly gaining experience.
Right.
When you're rapidly gaining those returns to tenure. And we also know that most wage gains come from actually changing jobs, getting an offer at a new firm, and those are new employer. Those offers tend to come most when you're at that age where people might want to take some time out.
Betsy's idea is not crazy, by the way, which is from an income perspective, the right thing to do is stay home, but stay home with your grandchildren. Because you're harming the future career you're not going to have because you're going to retire anyway. Actually, you see a lot of that in the African American community.
And in the Latina community as well. A lot of the women I interviewed.
So there's an open question as to whether we're going to see that become a more mainstream, trend.
Grandparents as the.
I'm going to stay home. I'm just going to stay home in 30 years' time.
Right. That's interesting. Yeah. And so let's talk about, the Pew Research Center had this really fascinating report a couple of weeks ago about that 40% of mothers are the primary breadwinners in their households, which is incredibly significant. But Betsy, you and I have also talked about, regardless of whether or not women are breadwinners, they're contributing more than ever before in terms of family wages. I mean, contributing much more to the family coffers than they ever have, and that changes dynamics within marriage. And can you all talk about how that changes dynamics within marriage?
Well, let's first talk about this sort of what's been going on with marriages, and one of the reasons we're ending up with so many women who are out earning. And really, we were talking about why marriage is changing, and one of the implications of how marriage is changing is that it's become much more appealing for highly educated women, and it's become much less appealing for less educated women. So, college-educated women used to be the least likely to marry. If you look at women born in 1900, by age 50, 76% of the college-educated women had married, compared to 90% of the high school graduates. That is now flipped on its head with the college graduate women who are more likely to marry. But